About him and bring him in if you wanted to.
We could do that. I'm just in a little bit of trouble because I have to go over to Life is Beautiful.
Right. Well, I said, let's start. We'll start early, and then when he walks in, we'll incorporate him into the show, and then we'll do the whole second episode about him.
Yeah, good idea.
And then we at least start at whatever time you need to start.
Good.
15
seconds. That's seconds, not minutes, just so you know. Well, I'm accustomed to a smooth ride.
This is Penn Sunday School, and to our listening ears, all nations sing and round us rings the music of the spheres. This is Penn Sunday School.
Brothers and sisters, welcome to Penn Sunday School, starring Penn Gillette. My name is Michael Godot. Matt Donnelly is off somewhere doing shows with Piff, but Penn and I are broadcasting from the Show Creator Studios in Las Vegas. Author Marc Ambinder is here, and we're going to talk about his new book, The Brink, President Reagan and His Nuclear War Scare of 1983. And that's right, we're going to do a show like adults, mostly. Here he is, preaching love, Mr. Penn Gillette.
We're going to talk about all-out nuclear war and the annihilation of life on planet Earth. Mm-hmm. But first...
Cotton candy grapes.
Cotton candy grapes, yeah. I think we need to mark that Paul Simon did his last show.
That's very sad.
In Queens. I guess so. I have reports that he stood on stage at the end of that Sounds of Silence his voice was so quiet that he may have been crying, which is possible, I suppose.
Sure.
Everybody in the audience was. And he had his hands up over his head in a V and just stood on stage for a long time, which made me think at the end of the show, maybe think about him telling me, be aware that you're on stage. Remember that you're on stage. But one of the reasons, he's done is that his longtime guitar player since Graceland died. And
I didn't know that.
Yeah, he's less interested in writing songs and performing. So, it's taken me. I have a list of the people who are, I believe I've grossly underestimated.
Right. I know for many, many years you have spoken without respect for
Paul Simon.
Paul Simon,
David Byrne, and Joni Mitchell.
Yeah.
I believe are the three people who have gotten the most. All three that I really, really like, and all three that are better than I think. I think one of the I was driving over this morning listening to Obvious Child.
Right. Fantastic song.
Fantastic song. And I was thinking about why Dylan is Dylan and Paul Simon seems to be like an also-ran. Also-ran. And I think it may simply be that Paul, in his writing, writes about self-doubt. And Bob Dylan does not. And it may be as simple as that.
You don't think that maybe it's the popularity?
Well,
the popularity might drive people to devalue the uniqueness of it?
Might be. Paul is much more successful than Bob. There's no doubt about that. I mean, nothing else. He owned his own publishing. Both real estate magnates.
Yeah.
But, I saw the two of them, one after the other, at the Hollywood Bowl.
Mm-hmm.
And it was an amazing, amazing show because Paul Simon was out on stage with a band that was perfectly rehearsed, with the tightest rhythm section I ever heard. He did his songs with some lyric changes and some arrangement changes and really updated and rethought of, and so tight, so perfect, voice dead on. Everything about the show was perfect, including Dustin Hoffman walking to his seat while Paul was doing Mrs. Robinson. Not only that, but a full moon.
Carefully rehearsed.
When he sang, and the moon rose over an open field, which Paul considered to be his best line. The sound was absolutely perfect. He'd gone through his sound check a zillion times. And it wasn't just like Paul McCartney making everything sound like the records. I want to really, really push that. It was reinvented. It was everything that if you were 16 years old and said, here's what I want to have a career in music, what I want to do. Get a tight rhythm section, work hard, let the songs really grow with you, pay attention to the sound, make everything look right. The lights were perfect, center stage. He did his hunk, did an intermission, which confuses my story, so I won't talk about it because Paul and Bob sang together. And then Bob did his take, and Bob was not even center stage. He was off to one side. There had obviously been no lighting done. He was in kind of what looked like Paul's ambient light. He wasn't really facing the audience. He never addressed the audience. The band, you could not call them tight because they did not know the set list. Bob was starting songs in different keys and they rehearsed them. And there were times, I believe, when they were maybe 16 bars into the song and no one in the band knew what song they were doing. They were watching Bob's fingers, listening, yelling out what key they were in, trying to pick it up as he went. He was doing stuff like, Visions of Johanna, where he does a few extra bars and band does their best. And it really felt to me like Mozart Soliari,
Yeah.
It felt like a guy working and doing everything right, and then a genius. And that has been the image since I was 15 years old. And even though Paul, when we were off Broadway, may have been one of the most important people to our career, Paul Newman and Paul Simon were about as big a champions of Penn and Teller as you could get. Paul got us on Saturday Night Live. Paul was probably helpful in getting us on Letterman. Paul bought tickets to the show. Both of them left their credit cards at the theater box office and would call up every week and buy 4 or 5 tickets for friends. Friends in town, go see Penn and Teller, just tell them, they're Paul's guests. And it was easy because they were both named Paul. And I've seen Paul, and every single show I've seen to Paul Simon has been one of the best shows I've seen live. But I still insist on doing this 2-tiered system.
Right.
Now, with Joni Mitchell, I know it's simply sexism. Sexism that permeates our society and that I couldn't fight my way out of. That I would not be able to psychologically put Joni on the same level. Now that I'm trying to fight that harder, Joni Mitchell is clearly a more interesting composer than all the rest. Putting her in the category of Leonard Cohen is ridiculous. Joni Mitchell is not GD. She's not doing 2 chords through stuff.
Yeah.
She clearly is the most experimental and pushing the hardest of all of them. But I just, the culture. I'm going to blame the culture.
Didn't expect it at that time.
Well, yeah, I just couldn't do it then. I knew she was great. That's the thing about these people being underestimated. I knew they were all great. I mean, Joni Mitchell and Paul Simon and David Byrne, every one of them, every record, perfect. Every performance, perfect. Just the top, fabulous. And then I would just go, yeah, but they're not Bob. And I think a part of it may be Bob being able to do a mystique that was so much stronger than them. Paul Simon seems like a person. Bob doesn't. Right. And if you see an interview with Bob, he's saying stuff like, walk softly and carry a big light bulb. And Paul Simon's saying stuff like, I had trouble with the bridge on that record. I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure what song.
He was a man. Versus a god.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Well,
someone wrote that you don't go to see Bob Dylan; he comes to your town to see you. But I think now that I'm in my 60s, now that I've been working in show business for 50 years, maybe I've become slightly mature enough to realize that Paul Simon is as much of the real deal as you can get. And I want to be very careful, in Bob Dylan's words, care not to come up any higher, but rather drag you down in the hole that he's in. I don't want to in any way diminish Bob Dylan's status.
Right.
I just think I should raise 3 or 4 others up there. You know, and I'm also picking people from my childhood because that's an important part of the story. We're not talking about, Kendrick Lamar or people that are
Right.
that good now. You know, we're not talking about people like Prince who were that good then.
Right.
Talking about people, I guess David Byrne just gets in under the wire.
As-
I
yeah.
first went to a live show.
It was a little later, yeah.
77 of him.
Okay.
But certainly Joni, Paul, and Bob were my childhood. And Neil Young, I think, has got plenty of credit from me.
Yeah.
You know, it's very hard to say what you're going to get. It's so hard to say. Like, it's what bothers me so much, Billy Joel.
Yes.
Billy Joel does everything right, and I have no respect for him at all.
That's an odd thing.
And Billy Joel also knows it. Celine Dion doesn't know that people like me don't think she's good, and she doesn't care. But and it's not just me. I'm very clearly not just me. If you watch We Are the World, the recording of it, they've all got their music in front of them, and Springsteen, Paul Simon, and one other, but Springsteen and Paul Simon mostly, they have their music in front of them, and everyone around them is singing. And they're looking at it, and neither one of them makes a sound. And the rehearsal is going on. And Bob is over to one side looking at his music. And the second Bob goes, "We are the world," Bruce Springsteen and Paul Simon go, "We are the ones who make a better day." So it's the instant that Bob says, "This is okay." Because if Bob walks out, Bruce and Paul do not want to be the ones there singing their hearts out. They're just, and of course, it's not everyone,
Right.
It's just a certain
Just
group.
people you expect to be that aware.
Yeah, but what's interesting is Paul, who said very mean things about Bob, very mean things, and even written a whole parody of Bob. A simple desultory Flippic is against Bob Dylan. "Oh, Albert, I dropped my harmonica." Paul even does an impersonation of him. And Paul said stuff. And Joni Mitchell has been very mean about Bob Dylan. And but all the same, I guess Springsteen is not. But Springsteen's a suck up. But even then,
the boss.
that respect is still there. It's just interesting how.
You think Paul Simon and Joni Mitchell felt that they had been cheated somewhat? They thought, I am as good as Dylan. Why aren't I getting this level of respect? Do you think that's what drove?
Well, with Joni Mitchell, it's not a question. She knows and she's correct. It's certainly Joni Mitchell's gender, 1965. She just was not going to get her 67, wherever. She was just not going to get the respect of the people around her that identified as male. Just wasn't gonna. And that was the culture then, and there was a lot of people noticed that, and they wrote books about it. We're just talking about the Joni Mitchell thing. It was happening, I think, in other fields as well. There may have been some politicians who didn't get quite the power they should have gotten because of their gender. Maybe. Yeah, I'm just saying maybe. But yeah. So Paul Simon, and also decided to just stop writing, and we have to admit the accidental but very, very funny comedy that the day that Paul Simon announced he wasn't going to write anymore, Paul McCartney came out with a new record. And Paul McCartney also does great stuff, but his live shows, Paul does not exhibit quite the bravery that Paul McCartney, not quite the bravery Paul Simon, but he may not have a choice. It may be that if you've been a Beatle, you have to go.
If you're
out
going
and
to
do
that
something.
show, we want to see those Beatles songs. We want to be there for you
Well, of
playing
course-
that song.
Of course, you want that out of Dylan too, and he just doesn't give it to you. And that's why Dylan plays 2,000 seat places, and Paul plays 60,000
yeah,
seat
sure.
places. I mean, among other things. I mean, the Beatles certainly had more hits than Bob. Bob did not have many hits. I believe Bob's biggest hit was "Lay Lady Lay,"
Yeah.
and then "Like a Rolling Stone," and then we're kind of done, right? I think we're kind of done after that.
Till you start counting covers.
Yeah, "Blowing in the Wind," of course. Yeah, Don't Think Twice, It's All Right, and all those were big hits for other people. Tambourine Man for the Byrds. So Paul Simon has said, of course, Paul Simon has retired before. Right after the Cape Man came out, Paul Simon said, fuck it. But we don't, I think it's because Paul Simon is a real person, and Bob Dylan has never given us a real person at all to be.
Right.
We know, I know because I have, but you're not wrong when you picture what it'd be like to hang out with Paul Simon.
Right.
Funny, smart, easy to talk to.
Sure.
Has some insecurities.
He was on Saturday Night Live in a turkey costume.
I know.
Which, to me, that's up there with the comedy gods. That's that in my world, that is as important as a hit song.
That was the turkey outfit, and also the way he did it.
Yeah,
was perfect. The kind of pouty.
Right. I don't want to be the turkey.
Yeah, insecurity.
It's great.
And talking about Mr. I'm a Rock, Mr. Sensitive, and all that.
Yeah.
Very aware of all that. So, and very, very good friends with Lou Reed.
Mm-hmm.
And but very wicked, crazy, successful. Paul Simon. Wicked, crazy, successful.
Married to Edie Brickell.
Married to Edie Brickell, and previously married to Carrie Fisher.
Yeah.
So, Paul Simon, we will miss you from the scene.
Yeah, let us know if you're going to do another show, Paul.
Yeah, doing the last show near his home is nice.
So you were saying a 20-minute bike ride from his home?
I believe that's what he said, 20-minute bike ride from his home. And
that's pretty great.
They also said, which was really nice, the report is that he was dancing up a storm. Paul, not known for his dancing, not exactly the Mick Jagger, but they said he was giving
wanted to dispel some of that in his last show, just in case.
Giving Mick Jagger a run
back.
for his money. Lots of footwork up there on stage from Paul Simon. Also, last night, I proved that alcohol does not seem to help people in their card sorting abilities. There's a trick in the show that we call trust.
Yeah.
Where I have give people a half a deck of cards and say sort them by suits and values.
Yep.
I'm gonna call out what they are. It's a memory trick. And woman last night came down to the end when she was in all clubs, and she had 2 spades in her hand. She'd been handing me, as far as I could tell, random cards, which made the trick probably as whimsical as you could get. For a person to call and say, you have the 4 of clubs,
right.
And she dutifully puts the 6 of diamonds in my hand. But I'm focusing, so my eyes are closed. So
right.
I just take it and throw it down. But to the audience, it became very, very whimsical avant-garde trick, really showing the senselessness.
Commitment is really important in a trick like that.
And it really wasn't until
Believe is what you should have shouted after you finished.
And she also was very, very chatty.
Mm-hmm.
This is my birthday weekend, she wanted to say.
Mm-hmm.
I've had a little bit too much to drink. And I said, halfway through, I said, do you have some of the cards mixed? And there was one woman in the audience. She apologized later. She said, I'm sorry. I said, that's so loud. I had no idea. It was, I believe, a true ejaculation.
Right.
It was like a religious thing. She had no control. She was not heckling. She was not yelling the stage. She just was so overcome with emotion. She yelled out. The woman said, I don't really know where. And the woman in the audience went, oh, my God. It was just like that. And afterwards she said, I'm so embarrassed. I had no intention of making any sound then. It just came out of me. And it got maybe the biggest laugh of the show because she had been chosen by the gods as the voice to speak for everyone. She had to speak for everyone in the audience.
And for some people, she was not speaking correctly. Wow. Yeah. That's funny.
Yeah, so it was a...
Oh
I bring
God.
this up because a woman has written me the amazing Sanna, S-A-N-N-A.
I'm not Swedish. I don't know.
Okay. How would you pronounce, Mark, S-A-N-N-A in Swedish?
I wouldn't. But yeah.
Sana.
Sana, the amazing Sana from Sweden asked, I'm a long-time listener, but only started doing card magic myself about a year ago after binge watching Fool Us. I've gotten pretty good with some practice and have a couple of tricks that I feel confident doing. I mostly do the tricks in front of my close friends, but sometimes I get confident, and do them to people I don't know as well. Most people are nice and interested, but you guys are probably familiar with the assholes that only want to prove that you're in fact not magic. If I do a successful double lift, they want to see the card before I stick it back in the deck. They want to shuffle under the table. They want to shuffle the deck themselves, even if not asked to. And when I tell them, oh no, you can't do that for this trick, they happily exclaim that they've beaten me or just give me a smug look and the trick is ruined because the fun is totally taken out of it. How the fuck do I deal with assholes like this without ruining card tricks for me and everyone else present? Any tips are appreciated. I don't want to lose confidence doing card tricks because it's exactly why I started in the first place. I have stock answers for this, but thought you might want to address it.
That's me.
What's that? Oh, sorry, that is it. It goes into, that's when the quote ends. You know, it is best. This is not the answer she wants to hear. This is really not the answer she wants to hear.
Yeah, there's a lot going on in this one.
It's best to blame yourself. Yes, they are assholes. Yes, they are fools. Yes, they are ruining the trick. But that's part of the water you've chosen to swim in. Those people will always be there, and it has to be built into your show. Some guys, some magicians, I try to use guys for both genders, but I'm afraid some people don't hear that, so I'll be more careful. Some people like to do it aggressively. People like people like Jamie,
Right.
people like Jerry Camaro, be right in your face. Okay, motherfucker, how about this one? And they do something that's impenetrable and is built for that kind of skepticism. What I would say about
It's the same thing as dealing with hecklers.
Yeah. A few ways to deal with hecklers. One way is to be meaner, faster, and louder. You could get in trouble with that. You know, Buddy Hackett, he had a heckler, and then he did one of the greatest comebacks I ever heard, which was he said, "What did you say?" And the person yelled it again. And Buddy Hackett said, "Yeah, I always have to check because one time someone yelled and I came back at them like I'm going to come back to you right now. And it turned out I hadn't heard them right, and they just yelled, 'I love you.' And so it was really inappropriate to rip them apart. And then the heckler went, 'I love you.' And he went, "Oh, okay, we can move on." Was that, perfect.
Right, sure.
And then Dean Martin, probably the best comeback to a heckler I ever heard in my life. People were talking loudly. They weren't even heckling. They were just talking loudly. And Dean Martin looked over at him, just looked at him, stopping in the middle of a sentence. And they completely quieted down. And then Dean went, no. You don't have to quiet down. Not during my show. During Frank's show, you got to be quiet. During my show, you can bowl. I don't care." Stopped all heckling. Bobcat Goldthwait came back to a heckle and said, "Put the guy down." I forget what he said to put the guy down aggressively. Got this huge round of applause from the audience and went, wait a minute. What are we doing here? We had a guy who actually had balls. He yelled out in the audience to attack me. I'm on stage with all the lights, all the sound. People have paid money to see me. And he said, everybody's on my side. You all know that. The person in this room that had balls, the person who actually had the guts to say something, was that guy there. Let's hear it for him, really. And gave a really sincere round of applause for the guy and said, he went up against the man, because in this case, I'm the man. I get the mic, I get all the sound. It's exactly like that. I would say, my guess, and this is all answers you don't want to hear. All she wants me to say, I'm guessing, is those people are assholes, fuck them. And I'm not going to say that. I'm going to...
I believe that's accurate.
Yes, it is accurate.
So we can say that, but in addition to...
We're going to say more. And that is that there might be something in your performance and in your insecurity that is challenging them to challenge you back. That's not always true. That's not always true. But you always want to look for that. You always want to look, if your performance touches into, I can do this, you can't, ha, ha, ha. If there's a moment of bravado or showing off that's even slightly, even the slightest iota of hubris, some people will react to that very strongly. Now, many magicians want to have an attitude that is full of hubris and very showing off. And then they're going to get that back and then come back to it. Some people don't want that. I mean, Mike Close, one of the greatest card mechanics in the world, I've seen him perform for hours in front of drunk crowds and crazy crowds, and I've never seen him have a bit of that. And he's doing the hardest stuff anyone's ever done with cards. No one can handle the deck better, but his attitude is so gentle and self-effacing that you wouldn't think for a second about pulling cards out of his hands or attacking him.
He's actually one of the magicians that I have in my stock answer.
Oh, really? Yeah. Never comes up. Juan Tamariz. I'm saying that name wrong, but Juan Tamariz, maybe best card magician in the world right now. Maybe not even maybe. He's such a good card magician that if you're from his country, you end up being better than any card magician anywhere else, just from being born close to him. Juan is, in terms of method, and I say this with a slightly different meaning of the word than lay people would have, the meanest person in terms of method. When you find out how he's done a trick, you just go, you fucking asshole. They couldn't bust you on that in a million years. So skilled, crazy skilled. But his attitude is so kind of goofy, full of life, full of joy.
Yeah.
And just, whoa, look at what's happened. Whoa, this is...
The show flows over him.
Yeah. So that it just washes that out completely. So I would say, as you get better, you might want to look, because our insecurity often comes across as a slight pushing and overconfidence, and you might want to look at yourself and see why that happens. Because I believe this person's presenting herself as an amateur.
Yeah, just starting out.
Just starting out, yeah. But I mean, just starting out and also maybe not intending to go professional.
Right.
I would say that if you consider yourself to be professional for even a moment, everything is your fault. Everything. That woman I described coming to the show drunk and not being able to sort the cards, my fault. My fault for not picking the right person. My fault for having a task too difficult for someone I brought up on stage. Absolutely my fault. Now, it ended up being a wonderful hunk because I covered it and did stuff. My credit. But I mean, I can't complain about that. There's a magician, a well-known magician, who actually said to a friend of mine after a show, when the friend commented that he'd gotten a lot of trouble from the person in the audience, and maybe there was a way he could handle it. He said, "Fucking happens every night. Fucking stupid every fucking night." Well, there you go. If they're stupid every night, they're not stupid. You know, if that's the audience you've chosen to play for, you know, when you're choosing what you're doing, there's a lot of stuff to think about, which is you can have the attitude that the audience is always right, but you have to make sure you're in front of the audience you want to be in front of. So if you are playing avant-garde music at a pop concert and they don't like it, you might be doing really valid, great stuff, but you're in the wrong room. And all of that stuff comes true here. If you are getting people from your style that are doing that stuff to you too often, you have to either change your style or learn to deal with it or not work for that audience. I mean, I can't see another choice. But yes, there's no doubt about it that, excuse me, someone who heckles or someone who stops a performer midway through, someone who talks during a poetry reading, someone who, was that?
I was going to say, my last book talk, I was heckled.
Yeah.
A book talk. At a book talk.
I was saying, I did my best to try and get the perspectives of the Russians as much as possible, because that perspective is missing from a lot of the histories. And from the audience, a gentleman calls out, "Do you speak Russian?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Well, then how do you get the Russian perspective?" Instead of saying the obvious answer, which is, well, they speak English, I found myself going into not just that answer, but how zillions of documents had been translated and declassified, and I spoke to people, the whole thing. And I found myself walking slowly towards him on the stage because my hubris and my insecurity at being called out on method had gotten that. The easiest answer would have been, well, they spoke English and just moved on. But I didn't because of that insecurity. So it happens,
Yeah, it happens
in all performances.
Yeah, but also my upbringing would tell me that anybody in that situation is absolutely an asshole.
Yeah.
Absolutely, someone who does that is an asshole, and fuck them. In the audience, I absolutely discount anyone who's yells out anything. As I always said, there's only one heckle in my life that I've really respected, and that was a heckle to Sam Kinison, who was doing a whole thing about Russia being incompetent, and why are we so afraid of them? They can't even build tractors. They can't do anything. And a guy yelled out, "Sputnik!" One word heckle that was the entire argument, and I kind of love that. With that single exception in my life, I have never liked a heckler or a heckle. So I agree completely these people are assholes. My answer goes a step further and says, but that is the water you're choosing to swim in.
Yeah.
What do you want to do? You have anything else to add to that, Reddy?
Did we want to talk about the other guy,
What other guy?
the Sunday guy?
Oh, the guy that didn't sort the cards when I tasked him
Yeah.
to? You can talk about it if you want.
That's the closest I've ever seen you to angry in my entire life.
I wasn't really. I was just
But
playing
you were
it.
playing you set up that joke at the front
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
I don't know the script, so I'm going to fuck it up. But
Yeah,
I'm going to be mad at this.
I tell someone on stage, if I raise my voice during this trick, I'm not really angry at you. I'm trying to keep a lot of stuff in my head and also give some excitement to the audience. If I raise my voice at you, I'm not really angry at you. I might be angry at her. That might be real. I say that. And it's a big laugh after they've already fucked up. So that's what I did with that guy, yeah.
Right.
I'm really angry at you.
So this person didn't sort the cards at all, didn't even try,
Nope.
and you didn't catch it
Nope.
until you walked past and you saw that they weren't sorted?
Yeah.
So
I told him to sort again.
Yeah, which you didn't do.
So he has a handful of cards that he has to hand me certain cards when I call for them. If you don't sort them, that becomes a very difficult task.
Yeah.
To look over,
There's a lot of time involved.
to look over a couple dozen cards and choose one particular one among them when they're in no particular order.
And the payoff for this trick is all rhythm.
Yeah. So it was tough to have. Changes the rhythm very, very much. So I have to play angry on that. Of course, Teller, who hears it every night, well, kind of hears it. He's backstage eating sandwiches.
Yeah.
But he, of course, thinks it's funniest the worse it goes. When I had two people who couldn't sort cards and actually sat down on the floor trying to sort them, Teller was just in hog heaven. First of all, he gets another 5 minutes to eat his sandwiches, which is really good. But also, he thought it was just really, really funny. And people seem to love it. Now, when it goes perfectly, those nights, I absolutely love it. But objectively, I realize those aren't the favorite performances of the audience. Those are my favorite performances. Two people, Cracker Jack sorters. And by the way, if you're looking to get someone to sort cards on stage, try to find someone who's tweaking. You really want speed. Don't go with alcohol or marijuana. We had a woman on stage for that trick who was about 90 pounds and shaking and pupils destroyed, looked like Johnny Cash. And when I told her to sort the cards, it was like I told her she won the lottery. She was so fast. It was like really, really quick. Because, you get a real speed freak and you dump out a box of cornflakes and say, would you count those for me? They're very happy. That's all they really want. So I'm just telling you, if you're choosing your drugs, choose speed for sorting.
So usually I don't bring this particular question to you, but I did this time because I knew you had it this week. And I just wanted her to know that it even happens 40 years into your career.
Yeah, it happens.
There's no
It
stopping
happens when you're giving book talks.
It happened when you give book
Where
talks.
were you?
I was at the Los Angeles Public Library.
A real place known for mean heckles.
Right. Now, the
tough room.
The
Tough
gentleman
room.
was wearing a jacket full of military regalia. And at another point in the talks, he started spouting off the names of military weapon systems rather randomly and was hushed up by people sitting next to him. So I think there was a lot going there. I mean, he may have lost his balloons at some point earlier in the day, which was fine. But I was surprised at how my own heckles were raised by his slight challenge.
Your heckle hackles.
My heckle hackles were like hairs on the back of the neck.
So I have your other books. Haven't read them. I wanted to read the Brink first because I knew I'd be talking to you, and you were writing some of it at my house.
Yes.
And we talked about it before, and I was very interested. What's really interesting to me, and this book really drives home, is that after the nuclear bomb, after Hiroshima and Nagasaki, if you listen to anything in the '60s, whether you listen to comedy, music, poetry, politics, everything is just infused with "We are sitting on the eve of destruction." I mean, that was a top 10 song, "Eve of Destruction," about the world being exploded, and duck and cover and all of that stuff. The world, I guess, but certainly the U.S. was obsessed every second with the threat of nuclear war. Probably the first time that humanity was aware that something could annihilate them. I mean, I know there were volcanoes, 150,000 years ago that came very close to extinction of the human race, but we didn't know it. We just knew it was.
It's hot outside.
I think it was cold, actually.
It's probably both.
Yeah.
Your feet are really hot.
But I think I'm right. That's the first time that we would, maybe during the plague.
The plague or whatever it was in the Mediterranean that the ancient texts turned into Noah's flood, which seemed to have happened. But that's basically the first collective eschatological catechism that humans had.
And this was, at least in the imagination, which your book makes much more true than the poetry, a button that one person could push.
Still can.
That's what I mean. That's what your book makes so terrifying.
Yeah.
Because I always wanted to believe that was kind of a lie, till I went into a Saturn missile silo, underground bunker, and saw the actual buttons you would push, and they are just buttons. But by the 80s, even Cold War, it didn't seem like everybody was talking about that all the time. We'd gotten used to living under the sword of Damocles. We were looking up at it for a wicked long time, and we just stopped looking at it.
Well, how old were you, though? I mean, for me, 83 was Mr. Roboto. You know what I mean? I wasn't thinking about bombs.
Right, but
I was in juggling shows with topless women at that point. Even looking back on it now, I don't have a memory of that being a dangerous time or feeling like it was a dangerous time. And still, people have a fondness for the Reagan era.
But
this makes the Reagan era seem horrible.
When I was 13, I was afraid of all-out nuclear war. I'd read On the Beach. I'd seen Failsafe. Certainly Dr. Strangelove was a top-rated movie. And in '83, I don't think in the popular culture there was anything like that.
There was a lot of blue versus red in the popular culture. This when G.I. Joe was created, when war games. There was a resurgence of this in the popular culture that I think can be tied to global developments, but both of you lived in the United States. If you had lived in Europe during this point, during the Reagan administration, if you had lived in West Germany, where you were surrounded by tactical nuclear missile launches and their complexes, and there were unpeaceful protests every single weekend, your level of anxiety would have been different. Now, I was 5 years old at the time.
So you were terrified of nuclear weapons.
So I was terrified of
Tom and Jerry,
Tom and Jerry, and naked breasts, which lasted for longer than that. So I part of what made the story compelling to me is that it truly wasn't as anxiety-producing for people in the United States for whom it should have been. People did not know how close we might have come until years later.
Right.
And that's kind of terrifying, because during the Cuban Missile Crisis, everyone knew that we were in deep shit. We're going to be in deep shit.
On the brink,
we were
which is the name of your book.
Right. And here, at least one side didn't know that we were on the brink, which to me makes it scarier in some ways.
Right. That's the horrifying thing about the book for me. Nixon being a drunk, Brezhnev, having problems after a heart attack. The world is run by idiots at that point, it seems.
The world is run by well, I mean, I think there's a continuity in the sense that we created these stories even after the. You're right. In the 1950s and 1960s, popular culture was suffused with nuclear anxiety, but because there was no active bomb that was used on populations, although, as I like to point out, we were certainly exploding nuclear weapons in oceans across the world, so we were actually using nuclear weapons during that time, but we created stories and fictions that it just wasn't that much of a threat. And I also think that in the minds of vote, it just became something that people didn't vote on or care about. But we never really learned what it would mean, because we never really understood at the time, all of it was classified, what it meant to have a president with the power to order, at that point, a global thermonuclear spasm attack or retaliation attack. So we just sublimated that, and collectively, and this is not a bad thing. We should have done this because there's so much else going on. We don't want to constantly live in fear. But at the same time, we have examples like this. We have examples where, Zbigniew Brzezinski is woken up in the middle of the night in 1979 because somebody literally took this computer tape, put it into a slot at NORAD, and suddenly NORAD's computers were full of a Russian nuclear attack until somebody realized that they had literally put in an exercise tape there. And by exercise, I don't mean Suzanne Summers. I mean war exercise. And so we've had, again, the series event that happened, but we very quickly kind of bottled it up after, because I think to contemplate the reality that we were having scares and near misses and how we were actually using nuclear diplomacy as a deterrent is, again, really scary to contemplate. And I don't think average human beings we're not evolved to contemplate that. We're evolved to think about much smaller threats to smaller groups.
Well, you're gonna walk us through the whole thing.
All right.
You're gonna walk us through your whole book. So get ready for this, 'cause I want you to tell the story. But first, I'm going to say, while you're waiting for nuclear holocaust, you might as well get a good night's sleep.
Might as well be comfortable.
No doubt about it. Sleep Number is a fabulous bed. I've told this a zillion times. I go out on the road, sleep in nice hotels, come back very happy to be in my bed. Mm-hmm. And we're going to tie this in with Paul Simon. I don't expect to be treated like a fool no more, and expect to sleep through the night. When you sleep through the night, it is the greatest thing in the world. It changes everything. It makes the threat of nuclear war seem less bad. You're more able to deal with that. New Sleep Number 360 Smart Bed helps everyone from parents to pro athletes improve their daily performance through proven quality sleep. My Sleep Number is still kind of soft. I'm at 65. So many couples disagree on mattress firmness. Sleep Number beds allow you to choose your ideal firmness on each side so it's just right for both of you, which is an important thing.
Yeah.
You don't want to be bitching about that. The new beds are so smart, they sense your every move and automatically adjust to you, keeping you sleeping comfortably throughout the night. Come in to see the newest Sleep Number 360 smart beds. It's your competitive edge from $999. Sleep Number is the official sleep and wellness partner of the NFL. Woo, that's something. You only find Sleep Number at one of their 550 Sleep Number stores nationwide. Visit sleepnumber.com/Penn. Find the one nearest you. Sleepy Q. No one was there with me.
I didn't have my hand on the button. Sorry.
Okay. Sleepy Q. Good. Okay. So, Reagan is president.
Reagan is president.
And the Cold War is on full tilt. What happens?
First thing is to understand.
Talking to the mic.
First thing to understand is the concept of deterrence. We think deterrence means mutually assured destruction, the phrase that we're all familiar with, which is that we're not going to launch against them because we're afraid that they would launch against us. But deterrence has never really meant that. It's important for the sake of this book to understand that what nuclear deterrence really was about was having a second strike capability, an ability to kill or destroy your enemy after they've already tried to kill and destroy you, but a capability that was credible so that they wouldn't actually try to use the first strike against them. We had moved beyond the era of just single volley across over the Arctic nuclear strikes. So this is the deterrence concept that everyone was fighting over around this time. It's the seed for all the changes in nuclear policy that we said. And it's esoteric to some degree, but basically as our nuclear weapons became more technologically advanced, and probably ours were about 3 times as advanced as those in the Soviet Union, it occurred to a lot of people in power.
How do you measure that? In damage?
In accuracy mostly, in damage, and your ability to control yields of the weapon, your ability to prevent the other side from shooting down the weapon by all sorts of countermeasures that you're going to use, the reliability of the warhead, which is there are particular mathematical formulas that I don't know, but generally it's also the delivery mechanisms, the way in which your targets are efficiently arrived at. So if you need to shoot a number of missiles at a certain NATO capital, you do that with this number of missiles versus 3 missiles versus 9 missiles, essentially. So you can think about that in that way. But it occurred to people at a pretty high level in the United States that, now we had satellite technology that could allow us to retarget our missiles if somebody were to fire some missiles at us. And we still had some missiles left. They wouldn't necessarily have to be sent to the targets that were initially there. It occurred to...
What do you mean?
It occurred to... Well, in the sense that before this period of time, this was during the 70s, you just had one target base. And if there was a nuclear war, whatever the nuclear war order was, let's say it was 3 Delta, you mentioned you were in an ICBM silo. The missileers in the silo would just program 3 Delta into their computers. Their computers would send the targeting mechanisms or the targeting coordinates for those missiles to their missiles, and it would be just this orchestrated series of missile launches, depending on whatever option. This was destroy China. Let's say 3 Delta was destroyed
like a
China.
tape that would just
and there were a bunch of different tapes. So there were 10 or 12 different tapes that you could use. They were all destroy the Soviet defense establishment, destroy the entire country, destroy China. Major options, limited options, which were not really limited. They're just destroy these couple of cities versus others. But these were largely feints designed to prevent people from actually using nuclear weapons. But then people began to think, well, why can't we use nuclear weapons if we can figure out how to retarget them so easily? If we have satellites that allow us to look at the damage caused by one weapon. And Jimmy Carter, in much the same way that Barack Obama is responsible for making it easier for Donald Trump to actually use a nuclear weapon, and we can talk about that later, Jimmy Carter changed our nuclear doctrine to allow the Defense Department to commit to a protracted nuclear war, one that the U.S. could ride out and survive a first strike, where the government would be able to survive as well. And the U.S. strategy at the time, this was the secret strategy, it was supposed to be secret, was that in the event of the advent of some war, we would decapitate the Soviet leadership. The problem with this is that, as befits a country that's free, any big change in doctrine like this leaks. And it leaks at a time when the Soviets are realizing that they're spending 70% of their GDP on defense, that their missiles aren't nearly as good as our missiles, that their technology is much worse than ours, and that our doctrine has suddenly become a lot more aggressive and a lot more offensive versus defensive. So Ronald Reagan is elected in this atmosphere. Forget everything else that you might have learned about the Soviets thinking Reagan is a cowboy. They came into the Reagan administration worried that the U.S. was just being a lot more aggressive. And then Reagan says, well, we're going to spend hundreds of billions of dollars to recapitalize our defense establishment on top of that. And then Reagan makes it clear that his goal in office is to end the Cold War, and doesn't define what that means. Does that mean ending communism? Does that mean removing from the yoke?
But in the book, Reagan comes off more gentle than that.
There are two Reagans in the book. There's the Reagan who is an aggressive Cold Warrior, and then a Reagan who realizes after a certain point that there's a lot about the Soviets that he doesn't know, and then he needs to learn a lot, and he needs to put himself in their shoes, understand what they're really afraid of. But we'll skip to 1983, which is when all this really goes down. There are a lot of different things that happen that if you were again, I tried to look at, this is where I was heckled in the speech. I tried to put myself in the shoes of a Soviet leader. So you're a really old guy, you're dying, you're Yuri Andropov, you have kidney failure. And you're seeing the United States conduct an enormous array of aggressive psychological operations and campaigns. They'll fly nuclear bombers to the edge of your territory and suddenly turn back, not things the Soviet would do, simply to show superiority. And that was the one reason that the U.S. was doing that.
And that was done on purpose.
Yes.
We want to show superiority. We're going to fly these to the edge and fly them back.
We're going to fly these to the edge. We're going to fly them back.
Right. We're going to pop up in a spot where they didn't see us coming at all.
We are using sophisticated and secret electronic warfare programs that can spoof entire fleets of fighter bombers so that you don't know that we're coming. And the Soviets had lots of spies that were telling them accurately that the U.S. was developing all sorts of this technology and these weapons. And
the motive for the United States doing that was just don't fuck with us, nothing else.
It was based on, don't fuck with us plus a genuine misapprehension of the true nature of the Soviet threat. There was a political divide about whether the Soviets were truly on par with the U.S. in some degree, but were hiding it. If you think about the way that, for example, everyone assumed that Saddam Hussein wouldn't have acted the way that he did if he didn't have weapons of mass destruction.
Right.
There was a similar intelligence misapprehension that fueled a lot of this, that Reagan had believed. He came into office believing that the U.S. and the Soviets were on par and the U.S. needed to be here, when in fact, here meaning much higher than the Soviets, when in fact the U.S. was always at this point way, way further down the line than the Soviets were in virtually every realm of nuclear technology and doctrine. And there was a lot that the U.S. could absorb a nuclear strike, and the Soviets couldn't. So Reagan calls the Soviets the locus of evil in the modern world.
Right, but isn't that partly based on his religious beliefs? I mean, doesn't he sort of come down to a simple, we're the good guys, they're the bad guys?
Which the Soviets don't understand because they don't have the tradition of Christian eschatology in their country. So they don't understand Reagan. They think he's a religious zealot nut cowboy. I mean, they characterized him in the same way that a lot of liberals did coming in.
But he also thought
Reagan was.
Reagan, right. he was, but he also, I mean, the way it was described to me by several people who had discussions with him about this directly, I mean, if you believe that we're entering the end times, he had read, which scared me, and scares me to this day, he was an avid consumer of all of Hal Lindsey's books. Remember?
Yeah, I know.
Oh, yeah, and
Hal Lindsey, if you don't know, did all this biblical prophecy shows with the end times, and this is Armageddon, and good.
right. I mean,
hooray!
It's that word at the end that makes me crazy. We're in Armageddon, and
great.
Good.
This is we're going to be raptured and we'll go up it. And Reagan immersed himself in this type of biblical teaching from the late 1960s through the middle of his presidency.
But this is the stupidest question you'll ever be asked. But no one could tell him these Hal Lindsey books are bullshit? I guess you can't.
In that it's hard to speak that type of truth to that type of power.
Yeah, of course.
But I mean, people around him didn't. Nancy Reagan didn't believe that stuff. But that was not something that Reagan would hear. In fact, he would. Reagan's mind in this was he would talk to Jewish leaders who clearly did not believe in the Christian end time prophecies, and he would ask them, do you think we're living in the end times? I mean, the Jewish version of the coming of the Messiah is very different than the Christian version is. But in Reagan's brain and Reagan's mind, there was just this conflation. He genuinely believed that we might be living in the end times, which leads to the obvious question, well then, if the traditional response is, great, why would Reagan work to undo that as much as possible? And part of that was the second chunk of his religious upbringing and his belief. I spend some time in the book trying to go into the way that Reagan saw himself. He's a guy who, when he was a lifeguard, rescued 70 people from dying one summer in California. He believed that he rescued his mother from his alcoholic father. I mean, he developed this complex, we call it a savior complex in a way, that was based on some genuine things. And truly, and also in his religious conception of that, believed that although the world might be ending, he had to do everything in his power to bring as much peace to it as possible.
Well, there's this thing I say all the time. In the beginning of my book, No God, that I point out, I don't know if even the strongest zealot really believes it all the way through. And that's the part that's so hard. I think that many religious people have just more nuance than I have. To me, you make a decision and you go with it. I don't think it's that simple with someone like Reagan. I think he's a more complex person than I am. I think he can simultaneously, and your book shows this, simultaneously believe we're in the end times, we're going to be raptured and God's coming, and I've got to stop this fucking nuclear war from happening.
Right.
I think he holds both those things in his head comfortably. I don't think I could.
It's an antinomy, essentially. It is. It's two beliefs held in your head at once that if you can see both sides of them, somehow they're complementary, but to those of us on the outside, they're fairly bewildering. Mm-hmm. And of course, Reagan was fortified in his beliefs because he was mocked for them, not just by Democrats, but by people in his own administration who thought and tried to take advantage of the fact that he had this sense, well, things might be predestined. But for him, again, this predestined didn't mean predetermined.
Right.
And so he felt that, especially after he was shot. He spoke to a cardinal from the Vatican who came to meet with him, and he said, I know now what my purpose in life is. And, it's at a late point to figure it out, but he said, which is truly to save the world from a nuclear apocalypse. And it's interesting. I'm talking about the book.
So we have Hinckley to thank for.
You can thank. Actually, you have the Secret Service agent who, had he reacted 1 second slower, and this is one of the weird coincidences, horrible coincidences of history. The reason why the bullet was able to actually hit Reagan was because of how aggressively and quickly the Secret Service agent pushed him into the limousine, because, of course, the bullet that hit Reagan reflected off the side of the armored car, flattened, and then entered Reagan's side, piercing his ribs. If the agent who was behind him had reacted 1 second, was slower, was worse at his job, Reagan would not have been shot. Right. But
he pushed him into the line of fire.
He pushed him into the line of fire. Right. As they say in the Secret Service, move forward, take fire. The heart of the book, though. Look, we're talking a lot about policy on a broad level, but really, I try because I like spies. I'm a spy geek, and I tried to find the stories of spies in the book who spoke truth to power on both sides and gave information that, when it actually wound its way up or climbed the ladder to decision makers, made a difference, but risked their lives and their families for that.
The first thing in your book that I underlined that killed me was when you say that and this is some of the good news in your book, is that the information that was in the popular press about the United States in the United States was more accurate than the spy data that that Russia was getting, which is amazing. It's amazing that level of freedom is really working.
It was. There's the Leviathan of the United States government figures out how to balance its equities, and what leaked turned out to be a fairly good approximation of what U.S. policy was. I mean, it was aggressive, but it was accurate. If you were to read the New York Times back then, and you were the Soviet leadership, you would get a fairly good sense of exactly what the U.S.'s intentions were. But the Soviet leadership was disinclined to believe that the New York Times reflected
they were fucking with their press so much that they couldn't imagine we weren't.
Really, but again, you have to look at it from that perspective, or else it makes no sense that these countries would assume things about each other that were untrue and would just back into nuclear war like this, or do stupid things. Think about the shooting down of the Korean airliner, which the U.S. was certain, even though it had evidence to the contrary fairly quickly, that the Soviets had done deliberately. I mean, the Soviets, a Soviet fighter pilot had shot down a Korean airliner that strayed into Soviet airspace because of a simple navigation error, and that was the truth. The Soviets were convinced, and the evidence that history has brought us, and frankly the evidence at the time, shows that the Soviet fighter pilot literally thought in his mind, or I should say the evidence that we have him saying, and as best as we can tell, that he was shooting down a U.S. spy plane that actually had been scheduled to be in that area to monitor a Soviet weapons test that was scheduled. So this plane is shot down. It's a horrifying scandal. The Soviets know that they didn't do it deliberately, and they hear the U.S. saying that they did it deliberately, which is usually weird because even from the Soviet perspective, there was a sense that the U.S. wouldn't lie about something like this unless they had some other plan. So the fact that the U.S. was essentially lying about what it knew about this airliner, because the Soviets and the U.S. kind of had the same degree of evidence for this, scared the Soviet leadership into thinking that fall something weird was going to happen. So everyone was on edge already. You have a couple of weeks later, in the Soviet equivalent of NORAD, a false alert, where it seems suddenly as if 5 ICBMs are launched from the middle of the United States at the Soviet territory, all aimed at Moscow. And it's up to one guy, basically the watch officer there, to decide whether to wake up the Soviet leadership and start the process, the 3-minute process, to make a retaliatory decision. And this officer ultimately decides not to, because in his mind he can't imagine himself that the U.S. would do so. And of course, the missiles just turned out to be reflections of sunlight off clouds that the antiquated Soviet satellites had misinterpreted. But once again, it's a jump moment. It's a scare. At the same time as that's happening, the U.S. is participating in this it's a yearly exercise called Reforger, where they're bringing tens of thousands of troops to Germany as a show of solidarity with NATO. The U.S. still does this now. But the Soviets start noticing peculiarities. Again, they're in a mind frame where they're going to start to notice things that they might not ordinarily notice because they think something's up. So they start to see peculiarities. And then we get to this exercise that is at the heart of the book called Able Archer, which...
Able Archer's in the book a lot.
Able Archer's in the book a lot. And
I thought it was Mabel.
This is the nuclear release exercise every year. I mean, basically the way that nuclear weapons in NATO works is the U.S. had the warheads, the nukes, and the countries that they were in had the delivery systems, you know, the missiles.
Right.
So you had to do an exercise every year to rehearse the procedures that would say, okay, we have the order to release these warheads and mate them to the missiles and then pretend to go to war. This was Able Archer 81, 82, 83. But it was a lot more realistic in 1983 than it had ever been. And there were a lot of changes to the nuclear communications procedures, all of which Soviet spies had picked up at some degree and were filtering up. If you had been looking at one of these bases in West Germany and you're seeing this exercise happen in real time, for the first time, really, you would have no idea that they're exercising because you don't know what a dummy warhead looks like.
Why wouldn't they announce?
They did. But you didn't.
Oh, you didn't believe them.
You didn't believe them because there were other things that what they announced was Able Archer is a command post exercise. It's a communications procedural test. That's what they announced publicly. But if you were looking at the bases, you saw everyone in their, you know, their mob they're mobbed up. I mean, not you know, mafia, but their MOB, full mobilization gear. The bases were on high bases from everywhere in Britain to you know, the border with Poland, all across West Germany, even in Norway and Sweden, were deliberately on high alert to practice this procedure for the first time. Normally, they would just practice the deciphering of the message and pretend to transfer the warheads onto things. But
and
they
if they were
going to
do something bad, if they were going to actually start a war,
because
they probably would say it was an exercise.
Because this is how but this is how the Soviets had invaded Czechoslovakia.
Mm-hmm.
This is how the Soviets genuinely started most of their incursions. This is how the Soviets decided to ratchet up tensions with Poland. So in their minds, this is how aggressive maneuvers.
This is the way we lie.
Right.
This is the way you're lying.
This is the way we're lying.
Now we're going to right now end this and continue it exactly on Wednesday.
I'm looking forward to it. So
okay.
people will have more time to sleep in their beds before we talk about the nuclear apocalypse.
It's going to get bad. That was Penn Sunday School.
That was Penn Sunday School.
Cha cha cha.
And to our listening
You
ears,
become naked.
all nature sang and round us rang the music of the spheres.
So we have a religious nut zealot cowboy on one side, and we have paranoid weaklings on the other side. Everybody's scared of them.
Yep.
And they're
More or less.
And they're lying to their people because they'd like their people to back them or not back them in what they're doing at certain times. That's what we're going to continue on Wednesday. And no matter what, even with the sword of Damocles over our heads, we still love you. Let's get right into it. It's going to lose the flow.
Tell me what I'm doing good and tell me what you want me to
Everything's
more or less
perfect. We'll lead you right through.
Okay.
You okay, Guido?
Yeah, all good.
This is Penn Sunday School, and to our listening ears, all nature sings and round us rings the music of the spheres. This is Penn Sunday School.
Brothers and sisters, welcome to Penn Sunday School, starring Penn Gillette. My name is Michael Godot, and Matt Donnelly is still off somewhere doing shows with Piff. Penn and I are broadcasting from the Show Creator Studios in Las Vegas. We're going to pick up with author Marc Ambinder, and we're going to talk some more about his new book, The Brink, President Reagan and the Nuclear War Scare of 1983. It's really scary. So scary that I mispronounced his name even though he's called Marc Ambinder. Ambinder. Here he is preaching love.
Yeah.
Penn Gillette.
Yeah, The Brink, President Reagan and the Nuclear War Scare of 1983 by Marc Ambinder. Now you've got to. I'm so comfortable with your name.
I'm so tempted to say I never really figured that out which one either. So you know.
At any rate, you're walking us through this.
Yeah.
So the Soviets lie about this is an exercise when they're actually going to war. So even though we're really doing an exercise,
Right.
they think, well, this is probably what they're doing.
A bunch of them do, yeah. Not everyone, but important ones. Important ones do, yeah.
And where are we in the story now in terms of a year?
We are in the middle of 1983. We are, just to set the scene, You have a Soviet leader, Yuri Andropov, who is literally governing his country from a hospital bed because he is dying of kidney failure, so mortality is on his mind. You have a president in the United States who the Soviets think is a cowboy, a president who looks at signs in the world and thinks that the world is about to end. He subscribes to a premillennialist eschatology in his Christianity and says to religious leaders, I think we're living in the end times.
And you have to really make this clear. Both of these individuals, by themselves, a guy in his hospital bed dying of kidney failure and a guy who believes we're in end times, each of those people can destroy the world.
Yes.
Alone. Kinda?
From the United States, yes. The Soviets had to slightly, because Soviets didn't trust. It's so interesting to think about how the U.S. government is, even in its nuclear, is based on this sense of trust, but ultimately all power derives from the president. In the Soviet Union, the KGB had the keys, but the order would come from Yuri Andropov. So it's a little more complicated than that. I mean, movie producers won't like that if this ever becomes a movie. But essentially the answer is yes. I mean, both sides had developed command and control systems that were analogous to each other in a lot of ways, although in the United States it was a lot more transparent and clear that the president and only the president, and not the president and the Secretary of Defense or the president and vice president, but only the president had the authority and the ability to launch a nuclear strike.
Now you talk about the biscuit.
The biscuit.
Why don't you describe the biscuit?
Well, I can do it right now. I mean, we'll go through it. If I'm Donald Trump and I want to launch a nuclear, even one nuclear weapon or 10 nuclear weapons against, pick any country that's not going to offend people, because I could do that.
France.
Okay, they're perfect. All he has to do is he could use a cell phone if he wanted. He could call up one of 5 command centers that are operating 24/7 in the United States.
He has these numbers on him, or someone around him has his numbers.
You can call, give me the Pentagon, give me the National Military. I'm just saying, you could, this is the only challenge to what the president. So the president has a biscuit, is what they call it, but it's a cookie. It looks like it's a kind of a thick type biscuit. This cookie, you think of something you get in one of those tins. It has 2 columns of numbers on it.
Have you seen one?
I haven't seen one, but I've had one drawn for me.
Okay.
Because they're very highly classified objects. So I have in my head a sense of what it looks like. On one side, you have 10 numbers in a series of rows. It's almost like you're setting up, like a magic. On the other side, you have a different set of numbers. So he'll call up what's called an emergency actions officer. This is the person who can format a nuclear release order. He says, "Hi, I'm President Trump. I'd like to, bomb France." The emergency actions officer will say, "Well, Mr. President, I need you to authenticate that this is actually you. I'm going to read you a series of numbers. Read me the corresponding numbers." Now, one has to assume that Trump is able to orient himself to numbers on a biscuit. But beyond that,
now those numbers are electronic.
They're not electronic. They're written. They're
So it's a decoder ring.
They're 567342 is on one side. On the other side is 221736. So if the emergency actions controller says, "Okay, Mr. President, my challenge is 556231," I know that wasn't it, but 556231, and the corresponding number on the other side is 448647, and Trump says 448647. Then the emergency actions guy will say, "Okay, give me the number of the war plan."
Now, why is it a biscuit instead of a card if the numbers are just written?
Well, it's a card that is thick, so it has the approximation of a biscuit. That's the terminology that the White House military office uses to do it. But yeah, that's
even now, because friends of mine who work in banking security, they have a thing that the number's changing every 10 seconds.
Part of the reason why this isn't, though, is that those are still somewhat hackable, given the way that you would need to have essentially some sort of quantumly encrypted system where you were sure that nobody could hack into those numbers, or else the simple way is to do it with just 2 cards that only 2 people have. Of course, it's not just 2 people who have those cards. There are a dozen cards across different command centers that predem, which is also part of what I think part of what makes it controversial. I mean, the president does not have the launch codes. Can't have the launch codes. The president just has this thing that says, I'm the president. And if I can convince you, the person who actually has the nuclear release orders and can format these messages, that's it. And there's no checks on that system.
Now, what have they done? I know that there's been, I read this book that one of the things the United States has gotten very good at is getting soldiers to kill.
Yeah.
During the Civil War, 70%
deserted.
of people didn't fire their weapons,
right,
which is astonishing to me. And if a person was firing his weapon, everybody went to help him because they wanted to be there. I was giving them ammo, I was doing this, so they wouldn't be seen as a coward. But when they go to Civil War sites, they find a zillion of these muskets that have been loaded over and over again but never fired. So people that were loading and pretending to fire and then loading again. And the way it's described in the book, that couldn't be an accident. It's people lying that they're firing weapons that they're not. And this is under fire. This is guys shooting at you. You don't choose to shoot back. And one of the things the American military got really, really good at was getting people to kill other people. And they brought the ratio up to, it's amazing, in Vietnam, it was up to 70%, and in Desert Storm, it was up around 80 or 90 of people that actually fired their weapons. All of this long-winded and half-remembered and incorrect information is all leading up to what is the training for the guy who gets the phone call from the president? Is he told you are just a machine, make the decision, or is he told if the president's slurring his speech, if you're not sure of the voice? How are they trained?
If there's a doubt about the identity of the person on the other end of the line, then the order is invalid. Whatever happens is invalid. So the person has to be 100% sure, which is why having the card or the biscuit, the printed card, is supposedly, at least in the authentication process, a fail-safe system. But you ask a great question, and not a question that is academic, because there have been times when presidents have been slurred and drunk, and we've been, for example, during the Suez crisis in 1973, where the defense condition, the DEFCON, was lowered, meaning risen, which is this other weird Defense Department thing. When you lower it, it rises in importance. And
DEFCON 1 is the worst.
DEFCON 1 is we're at war.
Right.
So a military
and how
officer...
do we get to DEFCON 50,000, which is where we'd like to be? There are some ways to get to, DEFCON 6, 7, and 8, and then ultimately to 50,000. A military officer can refuse an illegal order. So what is an illegal order? I'm shrugging because I know we're on radio, but I'm shrugging because there's no definition in... Congress has never said, and this is something I think Congress should do, this is what would constitute an illegal nuclear war order. Congress can do that. It has not. But,
now, there may be an argument with the executive branch if Congress were to do that, but we've never had that argument, and we need to have that argument.
But isn't part of the reason that executive power has risen so much at the end of the 20th century into the 21st, one of the reasons is that it's too politically dangerous to have more power? The way we've let presidents go to war without Congress being involved is all based on Congress not wanting to be involved.
Absolutely.
Right?
And in the same way that Congress was made aware of all of the controversial programs in the Bush administration, the torture, the NSA surveillance.
Right.
Now, certainly fewer members of Congress were made aware of these programs based on the level of secrecy associated with them. But Congress was aware. And in fact, the judicial branch at a high level was aware and said, no. I don't want to get involved in the surveillance program. I don't need to get involved in the surveillance program. The head of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court was told about the program initially. This is the NSA surveillance program, and said, it's an abdication of responsibility.
Right, so checks and balances
do
not work if People aren't checking and balancing.
Right. and there is a failure. I mean, in this studio, we'll call it a lack of, a collective lack of testicular fortitude. Some of it's institutional. Some of it is a sense that we don't want to get involved in these messy concepts. But the abdication is a huge, in my mind, moral abdication.
But the founders of the country could not think that their problem would be a lack of hunger for power.
Absolutely. Or a lack of right. But here's what the Congress...
And that's what we really have now.
Congress does not want to exercise power over things that could blow back in their face.
Exactly.
They want to exercise power over things that...
It's responsibility.
Yeah.
It's not power.
Yeah.
It is
power.
It is. But I see what you're saying is that it's a failure to assume responsibility. It's easier to assume responsibility for some failed program that doesn't feed people as much as it should. But it's much harder to assume responsibility for a program that tortures innocent people and renders them to different countries, or that challenges a presidential authority to launch a nuclear weapon at anybody, anytime.
Now, the guy, you probably know his name because you know everything. The guy who saw that there was reflections from bad technology
Stanislav
off the clouds.
Petrov is his name, yes.
Petrov, who did not wake anybody up and essentially made the call on his own, one human being, not to kill a zillion other human beings, right? He made that call on his own. Well, actually, we don't know what the next level would have done. They might have pulled the plug on it, but we don't know.
Right. You get to the permission, which it would have been much easier for them to retaliate and much more quickly. So you can't give him 100%, but I mean, that's a lot of credit. That's a hell of a decision that he made, yeah.
Now, is the decision he made was it considered at the time to be a treasonous decision?
Wasn't considered treasonous, but his career was iced after that. And only recently, before his death, thankfully, did the Russian Federation recognize him as a hero for averting nuclear war. So at the time, the Soviets were so paranoid, they didn't want the U.S. to know essentially how messed up their satellite systems were, because this deterrence thing that prevents sides from acting aggressively is predicated on the fact that all of these warning systems actually work. And when they don't work, it's a huge embarrassment. And as with many things in the Soviet Union, again, even though he had actually helped design some of these satellites and knew how crappy they were and could have fixed them, his career was put on ice after that. And it took 25, 30 years before he was recognized as a hero.
Now, how many... I've been told, and this is absolutely not credible information, but someone that I trust, who's very good friends with head of the Secret Service, who I don't even know who that is right now, has said privately and candidly in a way that's not true, and this wasn't me hearing it directly, that the Secret Service guys are in the room with the president all the time. All the people in the Secret Service are tremendously well educated, and they are tremendously savvy, and they're aware of everything. There are people who believe that if Trump wanted to launch a nuclear missile against somebody, that the guy nearest to him would punch him in the face, take him out, and do the rest of his life in prison for that. Does that fit in with what you think would happen?
That's a really hard question to answer. I would say that if that were to happen, the person who would do that would be the military aide, who can refuse what he or she believes to be an unlawful or illegal.
But the Secret Service guy...
Not necessarily. They're not necessarily in the room, in the White House, in the Situation Room where this might happen.
Because the president's not in danger there.
The president's not in danger there. So, but the person who will always be with the president would be the military aide, because the military aide has the satchel, the football with him or her, and has the satellite phone that would connect them, and actually has the tablet with them. There's a tablet now that shows the president the nuclear options. It's all, done on a nice little, technology.
A, B, C, or D.
A, B, C, or D, right. Now, pressing them doesn't actually execute it. It just shows them the thing. But that would be the first person who could say, I refuse to execute this order, and wouldn't necessarily punch Trump. He just would refuse to execute the order. And at that point, look, we come within a time frame where it seems as if the Deputy Attorney General was either jokingly or not jokingly suggesting that we invoke the 25th Amendment for the president. We were in incredibly uncharted times. So anything along those lines are possible. It would be, I know a lot of Secret Service agents as well as you do. It's hard to get in their minds in that scenario. I'm sure, given everything that's happened, it's something that they think about. I have no idea.
Weren't there times when there were certainly people on staff who thought Reagan was probably an idiot and incompetent? Especially,
toward the end of his administration in particular, there were signs that his Alzheimer's had advanced to the point where he was having a lot of trouble. During this stage of his presidency, there were times when his attention lapsed, but when he paid attention, and to me, again, we have audio recordings. I feel like now I'm answering the heckler, like, how the hell do you know this?
Right.
But we have private audio recordings. We have.
You'll be answering that heckler the rest of your life.
Yeah, I will always. That's the back of my mind heckler. But we have cabinet transcripts of cabinet meetings where the questions he asks are incredibly apt. We have the transcripts of meetings that he held with experts in the Soviet Union, where he would say, okay, I remember this about Soviet history. Is it possible that they're thinking this? I mean, things that you would not expect Ronald Reagan, of all people, to remember. But when his mind was on something, his mind was on it.
Right.
And he could make decisions in the way that you would really want a president to make decisions.
Well, but that's back in that huge mistake that everybody made. When you call George W. Bush stupid, when you call Reagan incompetent, you have used up words that we really need now.
Yep.
We have cried wolf. We would give anything to have either Reagan or Bush back now. I'm going to go back to something because I just want to hear what you have to say about it. It's not following your story, but I read something years and years ago, which means I could have made it up. That's code for on this show.
I'm a listener and I'm well aware of that. Yes.
Someone suggested, and I think probably as a thought experiment, but let's do that thought experiment, that the biscuit should be embedded in the heart of a military person that was around the president all the time. So when they wanted to go to nuclear war, the first thing they would have to do is to take a knife and cut open the chest of a person who had been near them, a close companion for all these years, before they could get to the codes in order to verify that they were going to. That, all I want you to comment on is that must be redundant, right? Every president must be aware. There must be nothing they think about ever except the possibility they could end humanity. Is that right?
I think that's right. And I think there are equivalent, much less bloody scenarios where the president would have to do something the equivalent of stabbing his or her knife into somebody's chest in order to launch particularly a spasm, or I call a spasm attack, because actually the word that that nuclear theorists use was orgasm attacks, because that's what they essentially would be. Or maybe that's just what's on my mind. But there are proposals to suggest that there have to be 3 or 4 people who have different parts of the authentication code in order to do it, or the president's or the missiles themselves have fail-safes on them where no matter what happens, it will take 2 hours from when you order something to when the missile launches, and you can recall that order at any time during those 2 hours. These are not sticking your knives into people's hearts, but these are actually things that could keep the nuclear deterrent alive, which you kind of need to do to some degree, but not allow a president on a whim to make that decision.
Yeah, there should be no first strike capability, somehow to build that in.
Well,
but then
they have to believe you.
Yeah, and that's
right.
but that's also instantly why arms treaties, although they're incredibly flawed, are very, very important, because they give you visibility into the other side, so that even if you don't believe them or they don't believe you, they can see things for themselves on demand. That's one of the key parts of the arms treaties we have with the Soviet Union. They can say, I want to inspect this facility. I want to send this Soviet plane, over this U.S. facility, and they can do that. Arms control treaties are part of that.
Now, this is really the only question that I want to ask you. And I know it's one you've thought of a zillion times, and I really want an answer. You are President of the United States of America. Wouldn't that be wonderful? Just be happy about that. You're President of the United States of America, and you have completely credible, 100% credible, there's no doubt. There's no doubt. You are completely sane, completely sober, completely focused, and you have as credible an information as you ever had of anything that that a country has done a first strike. And there are missiles coming into the United States of America right now. And those missiles are, let's go all the way, they're going to hit you in Washington, and they're going to kill you and everybody you love in the next 10 minutes, 6 minutes, use the number. Do you do a strike?
Probably not. It's much easier to answer that question if it's 2 missiles that are on their way to 2 American cities where maybe 2 million people will die, but just 2 missiles. As president, do I retaliate against 2 Soviet, Chinese, North Korean, Iranian cities? No. I absorb the strike. That's what I do. But, and I actually think it becomes easier if...
But you never ever...
I mean, this is me.
But no, I only care about you.
I mean, it's me.
I only care about you.
I can't imagine personally... That's why I'm not president, maybe.
But at the same time...
No desire to be president.
At the exact same time...
I don't...
You never let anyone know that you would absorb that. Is that right?
You can't.
You can't.
You absolutely can't,
Absolutely.
or else... Let's just... But
So,
not even... Yeah.
So a peacenik...
A peacenik would act...
Someone like me who's come out and said, I wouldn't do it no matter what.
No matter what, you would...
You absolutely cannot be elected. Electing you would be treasonous.
Or you would just have to lie, which I know is not...
No, what I'm saying is
yeah, you're
someone
right.
who won't lie about that.
Someone who will not lie about that will not be elected
And
president.
could, by simply not being willing to lie about that, end the world.
Right.
If they elected a president now, who was absolutely, completely a peacenik,
Right.
and you said, no matter what happens, I will not kill people, that would precipitate, very likely, the end of the world. Right?
It would. If you're talking about the type of nuclear strike that you're proposing. If, for example, but I'll give you, here's a counterexample. If I knew that those nuclear strikes had been launched from a command bunker somewhere in Syria, I have the ability now to launch a single nuclear weapon that will destroy that bunker, destroy the people in that bunker, contaminate the area right around that bunker, but probably not destroy any innocent person's life. Would I make that retaliatory decision?
Well,
yes.
Why would that weapon be nuclear? Couldn't you just do that with a slingshot?
You could do that. You could do that with one of those, the mother of all bombs, those enormous bombs. But you'd need a couple of them. You could use a nuclear weapon to do that. But again, think this is where we're at now. This is when I had mentioned on the last show how Barack Obama had made it easier for Donald Trump to launch nuclear weapons. Barack Obama, in order to get the votes in the Senate for the New START treaty with Russia, signed the purchase order, essentially, for $300 billion worth of upgrades to our nuclear arsenal, to make our nuclear arsenal so advanced so that you can dial yields down to the tiniest degree possible, but equip nuclear bombs with the underground bunker penetrating ordinances that would literally allow you as president to use a nuclear weapon and not kill anybody innocent ever.
Well, but this brings us to another question. We know that the word nuclear is magic, that is a magic word.
Yeah.
We know that if nuclear was not a magic word, we would very likely have nuclear power in this country, nuclear reactors in this country, and that very likely we would have in some way attenuated the threat of climate change. Don't want to overstate it, but this is part of my wanting to blame Bruce Springsteen and Bonnie Raitt for all of climate change. If that word wasn't scary, if the word nuclear reactor meant the same as solar panel, and we were France. Sorry, we bombed them later with Guizot's idea. And we were France. France puts out much less carbon than other countries because they're nuclear. Now, is that same thinking, is the word nuclear magic in defense?
Yes.
Okay. So there's no reason not to use a small nuclear bomb. I mean, this is Kurt Vonnegut,
right,
when he made the comparison of Dresden to Hiroshima.
And he was absolutely right. And I think even Winston Churchill late in life recognized the moral equivalence that Kurt Vonnegut much later on sort of retrospectively categorized. But it's absolutely true. We would be using nuclear weapons regularly. When Donald Trump ordered his defense secretary to kill Assad, which he apparently did, and then, of course, defense secretary ignored him, according to Bob Woodward's book, could have used a nuclear weapon to do so. And again, really minimal.
Is ignored the right verb? Well, go ahead.
Yeah, just brushed it off. Would that be? We would be using nuclear weapons regularly, and people would not mind, in the sense that they would be the radioactive part of it is still difficult to mitigate, but it's actually a lot easier now. Although there's still radioactivity, there's debates within the community that I'm not smart enough to even begin to go through. But there is a strong school of thought that says that we're within 15 to 20 years, the word nuclear, maybe because we'll actually have gotten to that point in climate change, we'll kind of move beyond our current period of mass illiberalism and move into a period of scientific enlightenment when it comes to realizing that we need to do something, and nuclear power proliferates. When nuclear loses the taboo and magic connotation, and also that applies to the realm of defense. And Barack Obama made it a lot easier for that to happen in the United States because he legitimately needed to get votes for a very important arms control treaty.
So when and I can't believe I'm about to say this, and I sure hope you shoot me down. When Donald Trump says, I don't know why we would have nuclear weapons categorically off the table, he's right?
All presidents have said that, but yes, he's right. I mean, he's right from the sense of this is where 30, 40, 50 years of the development of doctrine, of even the way that we think about it morally, has advanced to. So it makes, other than simply saying there's something inviolate about not ever using a nuclear weapon just because, right? Because
but I mean,
it's a just so. It really is it's a just so story that we tell ourselves to, nuclear no, ever.
We could live in a different world
where people were using nuclear weapons on a limited basis regularly, and the world would not look all that different.
But we could also live in the opposite world, where in 1968, a treaty was signed that every nuclear weapon would be destroyed forever, and no one would ever work on them again. And we could have a bomb that wasn't nuclear that was just as bad.
Yeah.
Yeah, we could live in that world too.
Yes.
So there is just a magic. It's one of the things that when I visited USAMRIID, the Army base, and did that tour that was so life-changing for me, those guys there say, biological warfare would be much more humane we could use biological warfare to take out any leader we wanted with almost no deaths. You know, we could just make everybody wicked sick for 24 hours, be able to go in after 8 with nothing being contagious, and walk in with people incapacitated and do what we had to do, get out, and everybody gets better in 24 hours.
Same argument was made with drones and is made with drones.
Yeah.
And it's not an argument that is entirely without substance or merit. There are significant counter-arguments to it, but yeah.
What are some of the counter-arguments?
Well, I mean, the counter-arguments are human beings still operate the drones. Innocent people are often killed. The intelligence is flawed, so we've killed lots and lots of people. It makes it easier for presidents to do things at a distance, and therefore the external or the consequences of their actions they'll appreciate less. So
back to having the biscuit in the heart.
Right. But I mean, you're familiar with you are familiar with those arguments as well. But if the question is, should we develop more as a military that wants to minimize civilian casualties, which whether you are a pacifist or not, or you need to. I think we all have some appreciation that on a very broad level, the men and women who are serving in our armed forces believe that is indeed a goal of our military technology development, is to reduce civilian casualties and reduce suffering with the weapons that we do create. Precision technology like that is absolutely what we would spend money to develop, but not for these certain magic words that we just
now
can't use.
The other thing is we always have to get to Steven Pinker.
Yeah.
And you read the Better Angels book.
And the new one. Yeah.
We're not using the weapons much at all, right? We're just not. There just isn't much war going on. As a matter of fact, we're in more danger from too many calories than we are from bombs of any kind. Barring what we have perhaps now, legitimate madmen. But of course we also have, for the first time I think, everybody around the world knowing we have a crazy person in charge of the U.S. Everybody in power certainly knows that. We are probably safer now than we were in '83.
Yeah, have things changed?
Where are we now?
In 1983, you had 5, and some of this gets to the magic of the word nuclear. So I'll lay it out this way. In 1983, you had 5 countries with nuclear weapons. In 2018, you have 9, and all of those countries are at war on at least one of their fronts. So I'm worried, for example, about Pakistan, where there are Islamist terrorists inside the country who have attacked nuclear bases. The U.S. knows, because it tried to give Pakistan technology to make its weapons more safe and secure. I mean, you know the thing with a nuclear weapon, if you give me a U.S. nuclear weapon in my hand and I were to try a zillion ways to destroy it or make it go off, I couldn't. That's how safe the actual warhead is. In Pakistan, a warhead might fall off the back of a truck and go off. That worries me. So we are safe in terms of the United States and the Russian nuclear arsenal accidental launches or accidental explosions. We are much, much safer than we were in 1983.
So the mechanisms are better than they used to be.
In those countries, the mechanisms are useful. And in Israel, too. But we don't know about North Korea. We used to know about Iran until a treaty was unilaterally abrogated by this president. We don't. Pakistan has always been a very difficult case, and we have questions about India. I always have to make those qualifications, but yeah, I think overall we are safer in that sense.
Now, Hitchens, Christopher Hitchens, who I trust on everything, shortly before he died, said to me, Nigeria. Nigeria is the scariest place on earth, because he'd been all around the world. And he said Nigeria has Muslim extremists and very close to nuclear. How much do you, I mean, I'm just asking.
Well, Pakistan has both, but
Pakistan and Nigeria are similar in that way.
Pakistan and Nigeria are similar in that way. And Pakistan is aggressively recapitalizing, building more nukes, wants more nukes. So again, the threat parameters have changed a lot, and the debates have changed a lot. And I teach college students now, people who are in their early 20s, late teens, and what they know of nuclear weapons versus what my assumptions were, even 20 years older, just very, very different. And it's interesting you talk about the nuclear.
About that.
Yeah, it's interesting you talk about, because I teach national security reporting, and we had a healthy debate in our class about whether nuclear, given the way that other weapons of war were used indiscriminately and still are, whether precisely targeted nuclear weapons are all that bad of a thing if the proper controls are used over them. And they're much more receptive and open to that argument than someone from even my generation. I was 5 in 1983. So you have to think about the argument and where it's going. And the argument is going to precisely that place that Penn you just mentioned. It's going to a place where nuclear is not going to have the magic or the taboo associated
For
with it.
someone 63 years old, there could be no more magic word.
Right.
I mean, it is absolutely, completely, and utterly magic. It's just you say that word, and the discussion is over. You are just done. You don't ever go near it, and it amazes me that could change. Of course, that changes when we haven't seen it. Yeah, we do see drone attacks. We do see people dying. We do have better surveillance on that than we ever have. We have that gets broadcast. We get to see that and know about that. But I think the fact it doesn't seem, from what you say, like it was absolutely taught to me with no qualifications whatsoever that if anyone in the world fired a nuclear weapon at anyone else in the world, it was then the end of life as we know it. Might not be extinction, might not be the planet ruined forever, but certainly it would be worse than anything that happened in our lifetime anywhere in the world. That seems to be not the case now. But was that the case in '83?
That would have been the case in '83.
Well,
and we were the only ones.
First, but go ahead, you do that.
I was going to say we were the only ones who legitimately had a first strike capability, and don't seem to have known that.
We assume the Soviets had a much more robust and survivable first strike capability than they actually had.
I'm going to say this, because there's going to be no good time to work this in. If you like my show, you're going to love The Producer's Guide on Podcast One. The veteran Hollywood producer Todd Garner pulls some strings and talks to some of the biggest names in the business, including host of Survivor Jeff Probst and the creator of a TV drama, This Is Us, Dan Fogelman. Check out The Producer's Guide every Thursday on Podcast One, or as we call it,
Podcastone,
or wherever you get your favorite podcast. We got that done.
Hey, Penn, I was just thinking about how much of a nuclear power Podcastone is. I'll just switch that around later on.
Were there other so let's get right to I'm trying to look at the time here. Let's get right to '83, and people are going to read your book and find out the details, and you'll back this up. But in kind of colloquial terms, how close were we in '83, and what stopped it?
November 8th, 1983 was the day that this actual the transfer of the warheads to the Nike Hercules missiles that would fire them was being practiced. Outside, and they're actually
carrying them there.
Carrying them there. Outside of the base, there are Soviet Special Forces soldiers that are spying on this base, the base that I describe in the book, and we know this to be the truth. There were East German spies as well that had orders to shoot literally to shoot into the canisters of the the warheads, to disable them, or to invade the base if they thought that these weapons were actually going to be launched. And they were at the ready to do so.
Shooting a rifle into a nuclear warhead?
It could disable them.
Break the electronics.
It would break the electronics. It would just disable it. But at the same time, that's the type of thing when the threshold for action is much lower, and this is happening all across Europe, where one thing like that could lead into a shooting war. I will not go so far as to say that we were as close as we were during the Cuban Missile Crisis, but we haven't come as close, in part because here's some other, just to give you a sense of what else was happening on November 8th that the U.S. did not know about, and this is the scary thing to me. The U.S. did not know that the Soviets had deployed their intermediate range nuclear missiles, the ones that were mobile, to secret wartime locations outside of Moscow and put them on 3-minute alert. They did not know that the equivalent of the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff in the Soviet Union, Nikolai Ogarkov, was in the nuclear bunker waiting. They did not know that the KGB had sent special officers into ICBM silos along the northern perimeter of the Soviet Union with their guns and with their special keys. What would have happened if the missileers in the Soviet Union had refused to execute the orders? The KGB officers would have shot them and then turned the keys themselves. They did not know that nuclear weapons had been dispersed throughout the Soviet Union and indeed throughout the Warsaw Pact territory. The fact that they, meaning we, the West, our side, did not know that suggests or shows how close the countries truly were to a catastrophic misunderstanding. If we had known that, and they were doing that for show, in other words, to say, oh, we know what you're up to, so we're going to do this to show you that we're prepared, well, that's one thing, and that instantiates a degree of trust. But we did not know that until months afterwards, in some cases 20 years afterwards, when the Soviets declassified their intelligence. So we came close.
And why did they stand down?
They stood down in part because there was a frantic scramble, at least among the East Germans who had really good intelligence, to ascertain from their spies whether NATO was actually up to something. They stood down because of spies like Oleg Gordievsky, who was a KGB officer in London, assigned to London, who was spying for the Brits, who was telling higher headquarters at the time, nothing is happening. There is no exercise. And that information was slowly percolating up. It didn't escalate because the U.S., there's a military commander named, at the time he was a brigadier general, Lenny Perutz. Leonard, but, we'll call him Lenny because a guy who does something well deserves to be called Lenny. He was in charge of Air Force intelligence. He noticed that there were some weird things going on with the Soviets' deployment of their reconnaissance planes. And he could have launched a similar flight of U.S. reconnaissance planes that would have really scared the hell out of the Soviets at that moment, but decided to do nothing and just let the Soviets do what they needed to do. He knew that Able Archer was going on, and he didn't want to escalate it, even though he could have in order to show that the U.S. was willing to do it. So you don't have a movie version of this didn't happen, therefore this didn't happen, therefore this didn't, just as you don't during the Cuban Missile Crisis. But you have 15 different things that the U.S. did not know that, had they known, would have scared the hell out of us and them and might have led to something. And I haven't even mentioned all the ones that, I found for the book.
So you're controlling, what you're trying to do is you're trying to keep the other side at the exact right level of scared and not a bit more or a bit less. Yeah. That's the balancing act.
Trying to keep the pee from not leaving and actually going into your pants, but being right there. No, seriously. Yeah. That's, and this is the military officer would say, the right pucker factor level is how they would describe it. And that is the goal. So, and it's an exquisitely fine balance.
Right, because you do the Archer, you do the Able Archer thing, and that is terrifying.
Yeah.
But if you fly some planes on top of that, that crossed over to terrifying to fuck it, we're just going to blow you up.
Right. And what would happen if the U.S. decided to shoot down Soviet reconnaissance planes at that moment? Which might have happened if if General Perutz had acted in a more aggressive manner.
You
in the
so
way
want
that
to
he
call
was.
him Lenny. You're
I
okay.
do. He's
okay.
Lenny. He's Lenny because people who knew him called him Lenny. And Lenny just seems like a good guy. A good guy, a guy for a guy who does something well. So, and as you find out in the book, though, it also took a couple of months for the U.S. to realize that something had gone wrong, and realizing, in the words of the CIA director, a quote astonishing array of indicators suggesting that the Soviets had almost catastrophically misinterpreted what was happening there. It took.
We had a cat scare yesterday, and we didn't even see the cat.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And to Ronald Reagan's credit,
that's the surprising thing to me.
When he
is
found
how
out
much
about this,
he did.
His determination to surface what the actual intelligence was and use it, to sense of, okay, we're going to increase confidence building measures with the Soviet Union to reduce the likelihood. People around him working with him did this as well, not just him, but people like Jack Matlock and others who were inside the White House. So it's not just a decision, but it's people who were keying off on what the president wanted them to do. And significantly, again, part of this was Soviet leaders were, as Reagan said once famously, just dying on me, so he couldn't talk to them. But it increased Reagan's determination to talk one-on-one with Soviet leaders so that he could look them in the eye. I mean, one point where, there is one thing that President Reagan has in common with President Trump, which is Reagan believed that he could go into a room, look in somebody's eye, and convince them that his view of the world was right.
Which we know for a fact is not true.
Right.
That looking someone in the eye does nothing.
But this was Reagan's, again, think of this, was his core belief, but he was really convinced that, but on a broader level, that direct dialogue between a president and, at first it was the sort of long-standing foreign minister of the Soviet Union, Gromyko, and then it was with Mikhail Gorbachev. But direct dialogue, things that only presidents could do, would be the way to kind of break the back of this hair-trigger nuclear establishment.
I may have been totally wrong in saying that's nonsense. It probably is. As a lot
It's
of
not
truth.
nonsense as a rule of thumb for human beings, but on this level, with nuclear weapons at stake, and given how powerful presidents are and the control that they have over them, it becomes more likely if you have the skills to do it, as Reagan did, as our current president probably does not.
Well, you used the word in the book, obscurantist. I had not ever heard that word, and it seems really great and appropriate. It's the practice of deliberately preventing the facts or full details of something from being known. And that's what Brezhnev said about Reagan.
That's the Soviets believed that again, they didn't believe what they read in the New York Times, which they should have. They believed that there was a broader plot afoot. That and that was because they did not. One of the reasons no one had met with Ronald Reagan except for Brezhnev at the time, and Reagan was a different guy in '76 when I think that happened, versus when he became president. And once you become president, as people who have become presidents will tell you, or have told others, you suddenly realize that you have this thing called nuclear weapons that you're responsible for, and it changes the way you think about things for some presidents.
Now, your book, The Brink, President Reagan and the Nuclear War Scare of 1983, Marc Ambinder. You'll get all this in detail, and certainly you are so thorough in how we know all this and how you will know all this and the work you did on it.
But I don't speak Russian, so.
But right now, I was also bothered by this. I just want to say how much this makes me crazy. It makes me crazy that the Soviets were involved in the peace movement.
Yeah.
I don't want to ever think about that.
That screws things up.
It screws things up. It's like the CIA being involved in modern art. I don't want to know that, but I guess I have to, because they really do. But I think instead of having you be president of the United States, we'll instead have you be who you are. What sort of things can people like you do to make the world better? What are we trying to do to make the threat of all-out nuclear war less? It seems like making nuclear weapons better is actually a really good thing, right?
Making them more reliable, making them better. Here's something that, it costs nothing. Having voters ask presidential candidates what they would do given certain scenarios and situations.
But they have to lie.
Have them ask the questions in ways that preclude them from lying directly. I know that initially they will, but the more times these questions are asked, I think the conversation will mature. Nobody asked them now. They're really just not even asked. And the stock answer is, well, they're nuclear, I can't talk about that. But, okay, let's take the magic out of the word nuclear. So as a communications project, if I'm a communicator, my goal for the next 20 years will be to make the word nuclear less magic and more intelligible so that people see actually what, A, the threats are, what they're not, what you can do about them, what we are talking about and what we're not talking about, and why.
Now, do you think the what I'll call the pinker trajectory of less and less war, less and less violence, that we're still on that path?
I subscribe to the pinker trajectory. I am worried that the institutions of the 20th century are insufficient for the illiberalism of the 21st century, and so I worry. I don't know at the end of the day. I really don't know. I do, but here's also kind of what kills me in the same way that it kills you, which is the existential, and this is, I think, a point that Pinker he makes, and I'm elaborating it a little bit, which is climate change and nuclear annihilation are the two existential threats to humanity that we can do something about. If there's a gamma ray burster that opens up, right, Then
there's the one that Pinker does not subscribe to,
which is AGI, which is AI, artificial general intelligence.
But many other people
make
that.
Right.
I mean, Singer makes that.
Singer makes that.
The Trinity.
Right. But the two that we can do something, we know how to fix these things. We just, for a zillion reasons, we don't. So I'm optimistic in the sense that we literally know how to. We might not be able to reverse for 60 years the trajectory of climate change, but we can significantly mitigate its effects on people. We know how to do that. And we know eventually how to, if we wanted to completely get rid of, well, not completely, but using, nuclear power and other methods, have the lifestyle that we're accustomed to without the carbon externalities that are destroying the world. We know pretty much how to do that. Nuclear weapons, we can get rid of them. B, we can create global treaties that are enforceable. We can change there are things that we can do. So on those levels, I'm confident in the sense that the knowledge exists. Then the question becomes, how do we build communities that apply the knowledge on a very broad political level? How do we really make these politically important and salient things? And this is why the illiberalism of the moment scares me, because if we know how to fix these things and we're deliberately not fixing them, what the hell can we do? That's what I'm pessimistic about.
Well, the chances of, it's a little bit like gun control. If you made the deal, there will be no guns in the world whatsoever. I think many people would make that deal.
Yeah.
I think almost everybody would make the deal. There's no nuclear warheads in the world. Get rid of them all. But you can't do that because the possibility is that someone's lying.
The possibility is that someone's lying. You can, in the case, though, of gun control on the one hand, nuclear weapons on the other, get 80% of the way there by doing certain steps. You can, certainly you can't do anything with the 300 million guns that already exist in the United States. You're not going to confiscate them. But you can, for example, there is, you can legislate the amount of ammunition that people buy. Not that you would or should, but there are things that you can do that can get you there. You can truly instantiate a universal background check that works once mental health resources are at parity and people are reporting on the same level and you have the right degree of privacy checks built into them. Not to suggest that any of this is easy. It's just, it's there. It's just the political movements there.
So what do you do on nuclear?
What do we? I mean, I think Congress and the executive branch need to have a fight over this authority, because Congress still technically has the power to declare war.
But something has changed, because in the 60s, 50s, we needed to have one person be able to push the nuclear button instantly in order to have there be, in the sense before you explain more to us, in the deterrent. In other words, MAD. Yeah, mutually assured destruction. But is this whole conversation building up to we no longer need that?
Absolutely. We
now can have Congress say, okay, it might take us 2 days, but we've got 2 days.
Now, you would want to give the president an emergency, some sort of emergency authority that you could build into that. That is consonant with the president's Article 2 powers. But we can start that argument now. It is not going to be an easy argument at the beginning, but there is so little that's on paper. Some of that's deliberate, and that's also a vestige of Cold War secrecy about what the rules are and what the rules should be. So why not start writing rules and iterating them and arguing? Go to court. Let the Supreme Court figure out the. I mean,
so you could say, for instance, the President of the United States cannot declare war on his own unless there's been a strike within the U.S. territory.
You can say that.
Yeah. So unless that bomb explodes in the U.S. or unless troops are coming to the U.S., you cannot do anything to do with war. I mean, yeah. But then outside of that, you're going to have a conversation with Congress.
Right. Now,
make your case.
The executive branch is going to fight back against that. But the point is,
and they'll use nuclear weapons.
But the point is,
small ones.
But the point is, nobody has started that conversation because there are. We've talked about the abdication of responsibility. There are a lot of other issues to think about, and there's still that magic associated with the word nuclear. So again, what can I do on my level, since I am not going to be president? Demystify nuclear. If I'm a communicator, as a teacher, or whatever the hell it is I do, demystify that word. Try to speak clearly and plainly to people who are going to be voters and participate in society over the next 20 years.
Wow, that's so...
And change that. Actually, now I want to be president. No,
this is so important.
It is.
Because I would never have ever, before we started the show with you, it would have never crossed my mind that the way to peace was making people less afraid of the word nuclear. I mean, that's completely counterintuitive to everything I believed beforehand. And I see it now. I think you're right. I think you get that ready? Anything to say?
I'm not sure. You seem to have something on your mind.
No, I just want to see. Sometimes we finish the whole show and you say, you should have said this. I'm telling you, Reddy, we're about to finish the show. What should we have said?
I'm going to let it go because I want to talk about something else. We're going to do that anyway, but not with Mark.
Okay.
Well, we started with a heckle, and I have kind of a funny one to end with. In 1984, the movie Red Dawn came out. I don't know if you remember Red Dawn.
Oh, yeah, I sure do.
Yeah.
Soviet Union.
And there's that weird line about a baboon that has no reason being in there. Go ahead.
I'm watching. In the opening premise, the Soviet Union has developed this amazing jet that is so much better and so much faster and so much cooler than anything we've got that we can't fight with them. They're going to win. They're invading us now. We can't stop them. And someone in the audience yells out, and this is 1984, the Soviets can't even fucking farm. That's the point when they're starving and we're sending them 1 billion tons of wheat. I just laughed so hard at the Soviets can't even fucking farm. It's Sputnik.
Sputnik.
It's exactly the Sputnik joke. which I thought was a great moment.
So I think we've decided, with everything we've done these past 2 shows, we've decided that if you're going to
targeted heckling,
targeted heckling, we want get your really clear points in your heckles and be ready for them. Thank you so much, Mark. Don't forget to pick up his book, Ambinder. Ambinder. Search for it at Amazon. I got the Kindle version. I've also got the hardcover version because you gave it to me, but I read the Kindle version. We are also thanked in the books. If you want to see my name somewhere else, it's in this book.
Oh, Jesus.
And I think, anything else you want to say to wrap it up?
No, but you read the acknowledgments.
I did.
Nobody gets the acknowledgments.
I read every word of your book.
I am thrilled. Thank you. This has been a thought-provoking conversation and entertaining, and as a huge, long-time Penn Sunday School fan, especially Mr. Godot's, I'm just thank you.
And we can all agree here in this room, fuck Matt Donnelly.
Yeah, he's not even here.
Not an asshole.
He's not even here.
That was
Penn Sunday
School.
About big events.
Doesn't care at all about nuclear war. No concern for that. He thinks it's more important to be funny in Texas.
I met the famous Reddy Rich too.
Yeah, you did. Cha-cha-cha. You become naked. I forgot those. You know, I never thought of that before. The word nuclear has to be not magic anymore on every front. That will be our goal from now on. I will stop when I do the cups and balls, saying the word nuclear as I wave the wand and the ball disappears.
It starts with magicians. That's
where it all starts. And thanks to all the people who didn't push the button up until now. May they continue.
What I really want to do with Mark is have him play his notes to camera, but I didn't want to come off like I was shitting on him for him.
Okay.
Explain play my notes. What do you mean? Just show my notes to camera?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, they're all...
We didn't get to any of them, did we?
No, we got... I mean, there were a couple of things. I forgot a name at one point, and I had to look down. I forgot Stanislav Petrov's name.
We
who was
should
the
never
guy.
Forget
never forget his name, and so I wanted to get...
Stan Petro.
Stan.
But you know what happens when you write a book like this is that the gestation period is such that you don't read it for like a year when it's edited, so you forget what you've written. So you have to go back and read your own book and take notes on it, particularly if it's something like that.
Or I said that?
Bye, everybody.
I don't do that. I deflect.